This video is for everyone who's doing the neurobiology and behaviour option of component 3. Obviously, you can go through this PowerPoint just by yourself. You've got it uploaded on Shobi, or go through it with me talking over it. Entirely up to you how you work your way through this. So let's get started. The first bit that I'm going to do is literally just anatomy, just the parts, the bits that you have got there. I've got a 15-minute limit with YouTube as to how long I can speak without it having to charge me. So, right, the brain is the most complex structure that we know, and we still don't know all of it. We still don't understand. Scientists are still researching, particularly the glial cells, and how other structures in the brain are supporting neurons in their actions. There's all sorts of computer work going on to make sense of all the different versions of scanning, 3D imaging, finding the connections, getting artificial intelligence involved in understanding how the brain actually works. So there's a lot going on. The high number of neurons in a human brain is quite surprising. Look at this comparison of different mammals that we've got, primates and non-primates here. The numbers that should stand out for you, if you were to just look at the mass of the brain, to go with the mass of the actual organism increases in mass. So the mass itself increases quite nicely with the mass of the organism. However, the number of connections which are enabled by how many neurons you've got doesn't seem to go linear at all, where we've got the Western gorilla quite higher in numbers and the humans quite higher in numbers. The bush elephant has a large sensory and motor cortex because it does have a larger body to feel and get information too. However, what's going on in a human, that seems to be quite a shocking one. Bit of a shame that the dolphin is missing in this line here. Another weird phylogenetic tree. If you look at this one, this is going back to your evolution unit, actually just laid out in a circle, where we've got the most basic hagfish, sharks, and then it goes through various other fish into your eventually into the mammals. Have a look at the size of the cortex T. That is something that kind of stands out in that lineage, and the not changing size of basic areas of the brain. So the H, the brainstem, medulla oblongata, and the very basic functions that you've got in a human body. In those organisms, digestion and gas exchange things. That's all going back to that. Different diagram, same idea. Now, I've put the link there as to that you know what the source of this here is, to just kind of get you thinking as to where have we got the different vertebrates as we go through this. The reptilian brain itself being a basic thing that's just kind of there. And some of it we have got through the fossil record. We've got the size of the skull, we have got the shape of the skull, and therefore we can deduce back where the areas of the brain would have been. So there is evidence of how the brain has evolved from the shape of the skull. Structure, so basic anatomy. You have got the brain as such encased by the skull for protection. However, there are, and these diagrams are not showing that the periosteum should actually be on both sides of the actual bone area of the skull. You've got the periosteum on both sides. You have got layers that surround the brain. And as far as I know, you do need to know your different layers, your dura mater and your arachnoid mater, pia mater, as the layers that in sequence with fluid levels in between protect the actual brain, the cranium, from any version of impact or kind of knocking your head on something, getting a punch to the brain. In a minimal way, that is protecting. You probably know the word meninges more from the word meningitis. Itis meaning inflammation. Something is angry, there's something swollen about it. You probably know different itises. I don't know whether that's conjunctivitis or whatever other itis, that's just an inflammation. Can be The most common ones for the meninges is a viral or a bacterial infection. Neither of them great fun and easy to deal with because they can be fatal. So something to look out for. I'm pretty sure you might have heard of symptoms like a blotchy rash and not being able to put your chin on your chest, light sensitivity, headaches linking to meningitis, and getting someone rushed to hospital as soon as. Right, there is a picture coming up of a brain being taken apart and the meninges being pulled away. So if you don't want to see that, look away now. Here we go, the meninges being pulled away, exposing the, I think that's a dura mater being pulled away. So you've got literally at the top area still the skull and then the dura mater, and you still have the arachnoid mater and the pia mater underneath it there. Okay, picture's gone. You can look again. Brain structure. You will need to know that you have got ventricles in the brain. They are there. Think of this as your local circulation. There is no blood supply at a certain part, and everything is bathed in cerebrospinal fluid. So the blood supply to the actual areas that is becoming intermingled with the actual circulation of the cerebrospinal fluid to supply oxygen and nutrients. So what have you got? You've got the 4 parts of it. I've got another picture where you can see those 4 parts, and it is bathing the cranium, the brainstem, and the spinal cord in cerebrospinal fluid. Different picture. If you want to pause the video here to get those diagrams, again, this is literally just memorizing where the areas are, the key functions. Again, another picture of the different ventricles. Key functions are to supply the brain itself. This here is just a little memory aid to kind of think as to why do we need to know about the cerebrospinal fluid. If an infection is suspected, you can take a little spinal tap. You can take a little bit of a sample of that fluid. Now, it's tricky to poke into the brain through the skull. You'd have to drill something open. However, having a lumbar puncture done, which means that between the lumbar vertebrae, you're poking in and literally sucking a little bit out. This here is literally a patient leaning forwards and getting a needle in between there. An epidural would actually be given that way around as well. That would be pain relief during, let's say, during any procedure further down, including giving birth. An epidural would be literally poking in there and injecting an anaesthetic that numbs further down. Just so you've got an association with the cerebrospinal fluid here. So functions, supplying nutrients, supplying oxygen, but also the cerebrospinal fluid contains antibodies and white blood cell. Obviously, technically, infections should be fought at every point in the body, at every place in the body, and that's where it is. The whole thing is not very unlike blood plasma. So picture it a bit like that, just without any of the cells, and the color of it is pale yellow. The oxygen is being transported just without hemoglobin. It's just being transported in solution. Right. Basic structures, you've got forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain. It literally is getting the idea that we can split the brain structure up and into the different parts where the different components are. You will hear different parts as we go along through this here. So what is in the different parts? Let's start with the hindbrain. In this case, that's all the bits highlighted in that sort of orangey shade. The hindbrain is the most primitive part. That's the reptilian brain. The most basic controls, let's say the control of the heartbeat, the control of sexual function, the control of if body temperature is regulated, basic homeostasis with regards to fluid control, that is regulated there. You've got the cerebellum, which is quite convoluted. The convoluted structure where you're getting all that extra surface area, you know that principle by now. On the surface area and also on the cranium, the surface area with all the convoluted bits. The idea here is that you're going to have in the brain, the grey matter is on the outside, the white matter seems to be further on the inside. White matter is where you've got myelination, where you've got the insulated part of the neuron. The grey matter is where all the cell bodies would be and all the connections would be. It's not that straightforward, but think of that as in a basic way, that you've got the grey matter on the outside, and the more surface you've got, the more connections you can fit in. So more wrinkles on the brain is a good thing. Smooth is not good. Okay, so the cerebellum controls fine controls, so the control of your hands and movement, the control of facial expressions and gestures in the face. The medulla oblongata, if you look at the diagram, that's here, simply where the spinal cord comes out. That is where your very basic balance, heartbeat changes, so the connection to the sinoarterial node of the heart would be to control basic things, to control blood pressure. So a very basic part of the brain. The midbrain, that is where you've got a linking between a relay place, so a connection between the basic structures and the slightly more conscious structure. And it's also relaying information from the visual cortex, which is all the way at the back of the forebrain, and the hearing input information, which is the temporal lobes, but that then needs to be connected to meaning-making parts of the brain. So the midbrain is a little bit of a connection between this area, that area. The forebrain, you've got two main areas of the forebrain. You've got the limbic system and the cerebellum. Now, have I got this in the limbic system? Okay, well, I'm going to go through those in a bit. The limbic system is fairly central to the brain areas and various areas that you've heard about before, the hypothalamus, thalamus region, corpus callosum, various bits. We'll go through each of them in order as to what we think they do. And the actual cerebellum, where you've got the bit more thinking parts, where you may think, hold on a second, that is where we do the more conscious parts that are contained in that cerebellum. So the limbic system is split into three parts, and that's where you've got emotion, memory, and learning taking place. You've got in there the hippocampus, which is meant to be a permanent memory store, interactions with all sorts of regions, including the cerebral cortex. You've got personality in the hippocampus, you've got learning and reasoning in there. Then you've got the thalamus, which is a relay center between the hippocampus and the cerebrum. So again, you need areas that just move forwards and backwards. The hypothalamus you've learned about quite a few times with regards to ADH, with regards to the control of onset of sexual maturity, so the gonadotrophin releasing hormone then sent to the pituitary. Pituitary being the master gland, but the hypothalamus tells the pituitary what to do. So in terms of osmoregulation, how much fluid needs to be reabsorbed by the kidneys and when do you trigger thirst, that's triggered by the hypothalamus. Temperature regulation, all the skin mechanisms you've heard about in the GCSE days, the raising the body hair, more vasoconstriction towards the skin or vasodilation towards the skin, and sweating, that is also controlled by the hypothalamus. Hunger, sleep, thirst, so quite a lot that where also the thyroid releasing hormone is controlled by the whole hypothalamus. That then goes to the thyroid, that then releases thyroid hormone. So it's kind of a hormonal trigger that is starting with the first bit of nervous intervention, that's by the hypothalamus. Now, the cerebrum, that is where we think the voluntary, the learning, the reason, or the personality, that memory, so the cerebrum containing that cerebral cortex. Still, most of that is not conscious. Most of that, what's going on in the cerebrum, is most not conscious. And apparently our decision making happens a split second before we actually are aware of, yeah, we're going to decide yes or no for something. The unconscious part of yes or no has already been decided before we consciously become aware of it. So a lot is going on unconsciously in the cerebrum. Right. I'm going to pause the video here just to make sure we've got enough upload time for YouTube. Next video starting with the autonomic nervous system.